Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about Urban Meyer and him calling NIL cheating, and now we're going to talk about UCLA and Cal. But actually, before we jump into that, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have fun back and forth here, is to use the tip and donation link at the bottom of your screen, GSMCPodcast.net. It's a huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all. We get to have a fun back and forth here and, learn a little bit about each other, which is always fun. Again, that's GSMCPodcast.net. But let's talk about this UCLA and Cal situation, because it has been a little bit of time. It's been about a year since UCLA and USC decided to move on to the Big Ten, and it created a lot of unrest. There were a ton of Pac-12 teams that were very, very upset, and it seems like that has not necessarily ended, at least in terms of what the University of California university system, or what they think about this situation. They apparently are pushing UCLA to pay Cal $10 million a year through 2030. So for about, in the next couple of years at least, they're going to be forced to pay them about $10.32 million a year, depending on different circumstances. And this is not ideal for UCLA by any means. When you talk about moving into the Big Ten and you talk about the massive gap that already exists between UCLA and Ohio State and Michigan and Penn State and all of these other teams that you're going to have to go up against, it's pretty large. And it shows you just how much ground they're already going to have to pick up being UCLA and being in the shoes that they're in. I mean, over the last since 2019, they've accumulated $167.7 million in debt in terms of their athletic budget. So this is the reality of college sports. It's another reason why this revenue sharing, the new bill that is about to come on everyone's table, is going to be pretty tough for some of these people to wrap their head around, and especially UCLA if $10 million of it is going out the door to Cal, and that can actually be adjusted over this next little bit if UCLA goes, I believe, over 10% of their revenue from a previous year. So let's say, or I think it's from this upcoming year. So in 2024, 2025, whatever their revenue is that year, if it increases by 10% anytime between then and 2030, then they can adjust that number from 10 million to 11 million to 13 million, whatever that needs to be. And that obviously is a huge thing for UCLA, because when you jump into the Big Ten, you're likely to get a little bit of a jump in revenue and that type of thing. And I don't know if it's going to jump 10%, but it could be a thing that, they end up having to pay more down the line to Cal. And this is obviously something that they're going to fight tooth and nail, and they really, really should. They definitely are not in a position to be losing a ton of money right now. Now, Cal is definitely in less of a position, because with UCLA, they're going into a system where they're probably set to make around $60 million a year from that media deal. Cal's set to make about $11 million a year, and Cal actually is not going to get a full cut of that media deal from the ACC for about a decade. Excuse me. So this is something that Cal absolutely needs. It's something that UCLA definitely doesn't want to give up. So it's going to be a very interesting battle, I think. I think one of the things that I was wondering early on, I suppose, when figuring out all of this stuff, and you might be wondering right now, is why is USC safe from this? Because obviously they left with UCLA. Why is Oregon safe? Why is Washington safe? And I don't necessarily have an answer for Oregon and Washington, because they both, I believe, are public universities, so that could be something that is coming down the road for the other two schools there. But USC itself is a private institution. They are not a part of the University of California system, so they don't really have an obligation to any other schools. UCLA and Cal are sister schools, as they call it, so they have a little bit more of an obligation. It's the same thing that happened with Oklahoma and Oklahoma State, where Oklahoma State was kind of arguing, you either got to take us with you or pay us a good handsome sum. And I don't know actually what happened of that. I don't think that ever really coalesced into anything for Oklahoma State, but it might just for Cal, and that would be an absolutely huge boost for them going into the ACC, where you can make up a lot of that ground that you're losing in taking a little bit of a pay cut with the media rights deal for the next little bit. You can get, another $10 million in your pocket and utilize that as you see fit. So this is going to be quite the battle. I think the big question is, what is going to happen to UCLA throughout this kind of process, because we talked about it earlier, and it's something that we'll likely be talking about for quite some time, is UCLA going into this new era of the Big Ten. I talked about it, last week when I was doing spring overreactions. We talked about how Washington might be in a tough spot in 2024. Well, UCLA is going to be in a tough spot in 5 and 6 and 7 and 8, because if this is added to the heap of stuff that is already on their table, it's going to get even tougher. UCLA is walking an absolute tightrope. They're threading a needle when it comes to really competing in the Big Ten soon. And even competing, 5 years down the road is going to be tough, especially when you have to give up $10 million a year and then maybe $20 million in revenue sharing, because if you give up less than $20 million, the people around you are giving up $20 million, and that hurts you in recruiting. So there's so many things that UCLA has to consider over the next little bit when it comes to just what their books look like, because it's going to be a little bit sketchy at times. I won't lie to you. I think UCLA is in a position where they can make it work. All of this stuff can come to fruition, but at the end of the day, I mean, you lose $34 million a year ago, and you're adding possibly $30 million to your load over the next, year and a half. It gets really sketchy over there, and you're going to want to put in more money because you're going to want to compete with these Big Ten teams. You're going to want to get more donors and things of that nature, and maybe they can. Maybe they can all get this all together, but their athletic director is absolutely up against it. Martin Jarmond is absolutely battling, and it's something that he knew he was going to have to do, going into the Big Ten, and the increase in revenue and the increase in, talent and competition and all of those different things that get more intense as you walk into the Big Ten. Well, you just got a huge disadvantage where it's possible you're losing even more money to what you already have in the whole comparative to these other Big Ten teams. So it's going to be a battle. It's going to be one of those things that I think you're going to want to follow very closely, because it doesn't sound very, interesting or very, wild from the outset, but it's going to affect both these teams drastically, where, Cal maybe can have a little bit smoother of a landing into the ACC, where they have a really talented team this year, and if they can put it together and, get a couple more donors on the table, plus that $10 million that might be coming in from UCLA, there's ability there to kind of build and grow in a conference that is kind of reeling right now, let's be totally honest. And then you have UCLA, where you're going into a conference that's going to be tougher, that's going to be more aggressive, that's going to be harder to keep up, and then you're getting, caned across the shin. You're getting, kicked in the nuts, where you don't necessarily have the ability that all of these other people have from the outset, and then you just get a little bit more hurt in this kind of process. So it's going to be a fight. I think USC has to be feeling great right now, where you don't necessarily have to worry about this type of stuff. UCLA, obviously, they knew this was going to be a problem when they moved over. They knew this was going to be a possibility, and Cal's taking full advantage, and I absolutely would too. So they have backing from, what you need backing from, which is the university system over there. So I tend to believe this is going to come to fruition. I think UCLA is going to have to pay Cal for quite a while and quite a bit of money. But at the end of the day, I think there could be a reality where UCLA comes out of this and is more than okay. It's just, it might take until 2031 for that to happen, because this is going to be a huge, huge disadvantage as they move into a conference where the disadvantages are already pretty plentiful for them from the outset. But it's going to be a very interesting thing to watch. I think this is something that could be happening more and more as you see all these conferences moving around and teams making decisions for themselves, but maybe not the people around them. Well, they're tied to some of the people around them. So that gets a little bit more sketchy as you kind of go down this road further. UCLA and Cal are the first that I've seen actually come to this point in this conversation, but it could be that many, many more do kind of down the road. So it's going to be fascinating to watch. I think this is going to be one of those things that feels inconsequential, but could define two teams for quite some time in the Power Five. So it'll be really interesting to watch that unfold. I think Cal will likely come out on top there, but we'll see what happens. But we're going to take our second break here. When we come back, we're going to get back to NIL a little bit, and we're going to talk about how people think NIL works in the recruiting world compared to how it probably actually works and how, things really go about. So want to dive into that a little bit right after this, so stick with us.